A year after 3-year-old William Tyrrell went missing, the investigation into his disappearance is intensifying as police step up their efforts to find him. I'm Mark Morri, the Daily Telegraph's crime editor, and I spoke to former Assistant Police Commissioner Clive Small, who captured serial killer Ivan Milat and has over 40 years of policing experience, about the case, how it's going and where it can go to from here.
From what you would understand, what would have happened, from when young William was reported missing?
As I understand it, William was at his grandmother's place, was playing in the yard, and she found him to be missing. The area was surrounded by bush, and my understanding is that at first there was a possibility that he'd wandered off into the bush, and he was reported to police as a child who'd been playing in the backyard and had gone missing. I think one of the other things that was significant about that is, as I understand it, the house is not on what you'd call a normal roadway, but on a driveway, rather on a lengthy driveway to a house.
Right, so it's obvious that, because of his age, that police would have just instantly thought a missing boy. And abduction's probably the last thing investigators or local police would think about in this sort of instance, given his age.
Look, absolutely. I think the circumstances of the township in where this occurred, the description of where the house was, and where the young boy was playing in the yard, would certainly have given the impression that he'd wandered off into the bush. And I'm sure that's the way in which the police responded. They would have got there rather quickly, had a look around, and then, not having found him in a fairly short time, would have thought we'd better raise this a bit more to a higher level, because even though they'd probably still have been thinking he'd wandered off into the bush, but just gone a bit further than at first thought possible.
How long would that normally take? When do the alarm bells go? I mean, it's probably difficult given the terrain.
Look, it depends on each case. In this case, as I understand it, they found nothing that drew immediate attention to the fact that he might have been abducted. Like, there was no shouting or noises or anything to indicate there that he had been abducted. So they're probably thinking for a fair while, or quite a while, that the boy had wandered off into the bush, and that's what certainly the police and the grandparents and family would have been hoping, I imagine.
Right, and as I said, from then, the longer it goes, then the doubts would probably come into the local police's minds, I imagine. How long do you think would they probably give that before you think, well, something's not quite right here?
Look, it depends on the circumstances of each case, and in this case it certainly would have depended upon the woodlands and the bush that was surrounding the area, because that might give some indication as to how far a young kid might have wandered into the bush. And in this case it would have taken probably a while, because I understand there's quite a bit of bushland around, and there's quite a significant search conducted.
Yeah, I suppose it'd take a couple of days. We know children can survive for a long time hiding in nooks and crannies, and no matter how good a search can be, they can have...
Look, exactly. The point is that the longer you go, the more the police would have been getting concerned. But at the same time, they would also have realised that experience shows that even young children can, on some occasions, survive a couple of days or several days in the bush wandering around. And that's probably the way they were thinking for a while, with good justification. The search was quite thorough and efficient, as I understand it, and the matter escalated as more information started to come in.
It also would have been hindered once you've decided, once you've thought, well, maybe we have to look at the possibility he has been abducted. So would it have been hindered by the fact of its remoteness, the lack of CCTV footage, which, are normal investigative tools in the modern age that the police can look into?
Look, that would have had a bit to do with it, but as I've indicated, from what I've seen, and which are only pictures on the television and in the newspapers of the property and where it occurred, it was an environment where you wouldn't have really expected a young person to be abducted. It was more likely that they'd wandered off, and that would certainly play on the police minds as they were doing the search. And so they had no sort of trigger to focus their mind on an abduction in those first stages. That would have prolonged it. But I should say that it's not a case of one or the other, because while police might give one part a priority, they always have in the back of their mind that there is this other option.
So the investigation, after a couple of days, they'd start thinking, well, we'll keep thinking and hoping that he's lost in the bush, but at the same time we have to look at the alternative possibility, and I think that's when sex crimes were notified fairly after a few days.
Absolutely. And the other thing that the police are very conscious of, and I'm talking generally here, is in a case like this, they're very sensitive to the feelings of the families and the victims, and they don't want to cause unnecessary grief or aggravation for those families. So that's why they're ultra cautious. At the same time, they're not going to hinder their investigation by concern for that caution. They want to resolve, they want it as soon as practicable because they want to give some answers to the family.
I understand also that homicide were also contacted in that first week or two, but that was kept very quiet. Would that be one not to alarm family because it hadn't been established? But I know they had been contacted, so they're very much in the background, and I think they wanted it that way. What would the reasons be for that?
Look, there'd be a number of reasons. The fact that they hadn't found anything to indicate the kid might have been wandering through the bush, or they hadn't found them at all. The fact that their concerns would have been getting raised that the young boy may not be recovered as quickly as they'd hoped. Without trying to increase the concern unnecessarily on the family, they'd have been looking for their options. And they would certainly have in their mind that young children like this, if they're being abducted, there are some usually pretty serious consequences. That's the reason for that abduction.
So they would go through a normal investigation?
They would be becoming a more serious investigation. They would be putting feelers out, for example, if they went to the sex crimes unit, they might well have been inquiring simply about, have we had any other reports in this area?
Right.
Do we have any people that are suspect? That sort of thing. And they would have been putting the homicide squad, if you like, on alert, seeing whether they had any information that might give assistance as well about activities in that area or in similar circumstances.
Right. And again, I mean, the family, like extended family, would be looked at, all those type of things, no matter how hard it would be for investigators. They have to go through those.
Look, absolutely. These sorts of crimes are one of the worst, if you like, for both the families involved and friends and relatives, and also for the police, because they have to play this very sensitive juggling act. They don't want to miss anything that could be important, but at the same time, they understand how the family is feeling, how the friends and relatives are feeling, but they do have to ask questions, and they can be very sensitive and very difficult.
Because the other thing that has happened is once homicide were involved, and behind the scenes for quite a while, then there was a big announcement that they actually had found that there was a pedophile ring in the area. So that shows you that these sorts of investigations can lead anywhere, can't they? That shows you that they actually were doing quite a job where they've uncovered a pedophile ring before not known.
Absolutely. Look, what you have with crimes of this type, I mean, this is very hard to say, but crimes of this type are usually not crimes that are one-off.
Yeah.
There are usually other connections, and there is usually some history with the offender or offender. It's a matter of finding out what that history is and establishing who the suspects might be, and that can be very difficult. In this case, it's those inquiries that they've made as feelers to find out what's going on in the area that have probably brought to attention this pedophile ring.
And the other thing now, we don't even have to name, but there's been publicity about one suspect, and the media have concentrated on that. And the police obviously would concentrate on that person, but behind the scenes, would they also be looking at other people?
So, absolutely. Without talking about a particular suspect, if I can say this, a person might come up for one reason or another as a person of suspicion or a person of interest, but that doesn't mean you forget everything else.
It's almost like they have like a parallel investigation going, look, this team, you concentrate on that, but let's not be blindsided. There are other options, and we'll keep going down these paths.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the worst things you can do in an investigation of this type, or investigation generally, is get a lead which looks good, then all of a sudden jump on it, forget everything else, follow that up, and at the end of the day find that you've been going down the wrong track.
And I'm sure, and police, again, for the reasons they don't want to let people know, they wouldn't be saying, well, we're also looking at 5 other possibilities, because that might thwart their investigation, wouldn't it? The secrecy. It's a major thing in investigations, isn't it?
Absolutely. Look, one of the biggest decision-making difficulties that you have is how much do you release to the public. On the one hand, you want to make sure that whether the public have got reason for concerns about other similar crimes being committed in the future,
right,
and to make them a bit aware.
So public safety is an issue, because if you establish that perhaps this isn't domestic, that therefore other children in the area could be at risk, so you need to say publicly that becomes part of your duty, doesn't it?
That becomes part of it, and yes. Then there is the actual direct investigation about who committed this crime and how do we get them. And even in terms there, in those circumstances, you have to consider, do we put a bit of information out through the media or some other, or whatever source, to perhaps, so we might get a response from the offender or the suspect that we're looking at, or might like we frighten the offender off, or are we raising the family concerns unnecessarily, making this unbearable for the families? So there's a whole range of issues
and I think also
that you have to consider.
Maybe putting public pressure on somebody who may know who has been involved and doesn't want to come forward because they're a loved one, but by doing the publicity, would that also be employed? I think, right?
Look, that would be also another reason, or another matter you would take into account, and that is, do we think there is someone out there who knows something, and might they come forward if we put enough pressure on through the media? The other risk you have, though, is you might even be endangering the young child. I'm not talking about this case, but generally, you could be endangering the victim.
Because when there's nobody, no matter what logic says or what history says, there's also exceptional cases where people have turned up 20 years later alive. So in the back of your mind, you've still got to think about that, don't you?
Look, absolutely. No matter how terrible it might be for the young person at the time, you still have in the back of your mind, I hope this person's alive, I hope we recover him, and I hope that he can end up having a good life. You don't want to do anything that's going to increase the pressure on a nasty end.
It's now a year, and there's been no resolution. Police are obviously still out there hunting. I think we've seen, and you'd know some cases, where the police will just not stop and they'll just keep going on this. I think there's a couple of well-known cases, aren't there?
Look, there are. I think and this is important for the families as well. They can rest assured that the police involved in the case are not going to stop simply because they think time has run out. Certainly after almost a year, you would expect that anyone who has had information and is going to come forward has probably come forward by now. There is little additional information coming forward on a regular basis, but at the same time, they do believe, they've got good reason to believe because of past practice, that you keep the pressure up no matter how long it takes, you'll stick it there until you get a result, and somewhere on the track you are likely to find someone will come forward. Now that could be unrelated information.
I think like a lot of the time, if there is someone, I think, criminal informants come forward where somebody's been in jail. That's a very common one, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's what I was just going to say was, you might have a person arrested for a totally unrelated matter, and that person says, hang on, can we do a deal? I've got some information you might be interested in. Totally unexpected, out of the blue. And that's often the way it happens. Or a person might even say to a friend, a passing comment that causes that friend to say, hang on, that was a bit strange, I better tell the police. So they never give up. And I think you're right, there are numbers of cases, not only of young children, but of other matters, and probably most notorious is the family law court matter recently. Something like 30 years.
And the other one I remember is Sam Knight. Remember, her body still hasn't been found, but years and years later, someone's been arrested, charged, convicted, and is still in jail, even though Samantha's body's never been found. And that again shows the fact they never give up.
No, they never give up. And as I say, I think if you have a look at cases now that are being preferred over even just past the past couple of years, there are a couple of very significant, very historical cases. I feel sorry when it takes that long to get them solved, as do the police. But it's important to know that they're still in there having to go, and they're not going to give up.
So where would they go now? It's a year. So would they now? I think they've actually indicated that sometimes they might just go back and start all over again.
Well, what will happen? What wouldn't happen? And I can't say it's happening now at this moment, but the process would generally be twofold. One is you'd have some police would be going back over the case from the start, saying, "Is there anything that we possibly missed? Is there anything else we can follow up? Do we think we've got it right? Have we done everything we can?" And then there would be the other police who would be following up those leads that are still outstanding, and then you would probably have sort of a third group looking at if it was suspected it was a person who had abducted a child and might have been a pedophile, looking at pedophiles who might have been arrested in recent times, anything like that, or any information there that's changed.